Hi everyone, welcome back to another week on the Brush by Brandy YouTube channel. This week we are going to give a makeover to this furniture piece that's behind me. This is a bombe chest. I love these. I try to pick them up anytime I can find them reasonably priced. Usually people ask way too much for them, so I always get excited when I see them and I can actually grab them. This piece I've actually done a few of these. I'll show you a couple different examples. So I have examples of this in several different finishes for this very similar piece. But this week I want to do something kind of different, and I felt like I wanted to kind of pull out the natural pine that's in this piece, and my inspiration came from this mold from Redesign with Prima. It's all these grasses, and so I think I'm going to tie this in, and this said to me very zen, some greens. I definitely want to go with the greens. Obviously I'm just getting started, so I don't know exactly the direction. Sometimes they surprise me, but we're going to start with this mold here and see where it goes. I think I'm going to do a soft blend on this one. We'll see. So stick around. Let's get started. Here's where I started on this piece. I found this one on my local Facebook marketplace, and I'm taking my inspiration from some greens and Wisal paint and this mold by Redesign with Prima. I try to snatch these up anytime I can find them, and it's not all that common. The top had a lot of dings and dents in it, so I knew I wanted to sand this one down to bare wood. I'm using my Surf Prep sander. To get these rounded edges, I just offset my sandpaper just a little bit, and I can press that edge of my Surf Prep right into the edge of my furniture piece. The versatile abrasives from Surf Prep allow me to sand curved surfaces like this with no problem whatsoever. Pine is a really soft wood, and it sands really quickly. On this one I used an 80 grit, then 120, then 220. I know that I need to clean my furniture piece, but first I want to start out by setting some of my molds that I'm going to be using. And I'm starting this because I need to cast this mold a whole bunch of times, so I want to get it started as soon as possible. I'm using amazing casting resin from Alumilite. It's a 50-50 mixture of parts A and B. I mix them together in a cup for about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to pour them into my mold using a silicone cup. When I'm pouring resin, I always try to make sure I have an extra mold out because I usually end up with some extra resin and I hate to waste it, so I just pour a couple extra molds. This is going to take about 10 minutes to fully harden, so I'm going to leave these be and come back to them in just a little bit. Meanwhile, let's go ahead and remove all the hardware from this piece. These handles are going to go set in 50-50 white vinegar and water to be cleaned, and then I'm going to go ahead and remove these keyholes. I just use a flathead screwdriver. I'm going to place it behind the keyhole as gentle as possible, and then I'm going to pry away the little nails that are holding them in. You can see all the dirt that was behind those hardware, so I need to go ahead and give this piece a really good cleaning. I'm using Green Ease cleaner. This cleaner is amazing, you guys. This is available from Wisal. I sprayed down my piece, and then I'm going to wipe it down with a rag. I could also see at this point, this pine is a really soft wood. Pine tends to ding and dent really easily. I'm going to leave some of that on this piece for some character. I'm not expecting this one to be totally smooth and perfect. It's actually going to have a lot of texture and interest on it. When you're cleaning your piece, you also want to make sure that you clean the inside of it really well, vacuum this out, and then I'm going to wipe it down with a rag as well. Pine means pine knots, and this one has pine knots, so I need to give this one 2 coats of primer. I'm using Wisal primer in light gray. This brushes on just like a paint. This is going to go on underneath my paint, and it's going to keep those pine knots and the oils from the wood from bleeding through and discoloring my paint over time. I'm brushing on 2 coats of my primer. I'm just using a Worcester brush for this. Primers tend to be a little harder on my brushes, so I'm trying to get in the habit of not using my good brushes as much for primers. When you're doing a look like this, you want to make sure you remove your molds while they're still nice and soft and fresh. So these are actually pretty soft still, probably not ready. So I'm going to check back in another minute or so and see if I can get them all to pop out of the mold like this piece is doing right here. I don't want to wait too long because I don't want these to fully harden. I need to be able to curve them around this piece. All right, I sat and played with this one for just a minute, and I'm able to work it out of this mold. It is way premature, but I want it at this point. It's nice and soft. So the last time I did this, I actually had someone casting these and handing them to me as soon as they came out of the mold, and I was putting them on. This time I'm doing it by myself, and it is taking much longer. So if you can do it, have a second person casting these while you're gluing them, because you need them as fresh as possible. All right, this is how flexible this is. And because of this, I'm going to be able to wrap this on the super curvy leg right here with no issues whatsoever. Had I let this harden, it would be much more difficult. So I'm going to go ahead and place some adhesive on the back of this. All right, and this resin is going to continue to harden, and it's now going to harden in this shape that I just put it to. So I did the front the same way. While they were still super fresh, I kept one at a time putting them onto my piece, and now they've hardened into the shape that I've laid them on in. So I'm going to continue on. I probably have one or two more pieces that I'm going to do across the front of this, and I think my look will be pretty complete. With all of my molds cast and attached, I do want to give this a coat of primer. The reason I'm choosing to prime these molds is because I'm going to plan a lot of treatments over the top of them, and I don't want anything to wipe away on the molds and expose the white resin underneath. I also want to use the primer to help make these look seamless to my furniture piece. Here's where I landed on this one with 2 coats of primer on the body and all of my molds attached. It's time to add some paint. I do give my primer a light sanding with a 220 grit paper in between coats, and that just makes it extra smooth to attach my paint to. I'm going to be using 4 different colors on this. I'm starting with Wisal Kashmir. This is a nice creamy off-white color. This is going to blend into some whites and some greens. I chose greens on this one because this is inspired by the leafy green molds that I put on there, and I think these greens are going to really bring it out. From the cashmere, I'm going from lightest to darkest, and my next color is going to be Wisal Tourmaline, which is a soft green. That's going to fade into dried thyme, and then my final color is called Charleston green. I'm applying these using Wisal brushes. The S50 has quickly become one of my favorite brushes for laying paint on. That, and I also really like the F40 from Klingon. This is just my base coat over my primer, but I am going to repeat this same process twice. So this is going to get 2 coats, but I'm using this first coat just to decide the basic layout of my colors. I had initially started this piece on a live video with you guys, and I initially thought that I wanted to use some greens that lean towards the yellows, and I ultimately decided to change that to greens that lean towards blue. And the reason I did that is so that my leafy greens can have yellows in them, and I'll have contrast to the background so they'll stand out a little bit more. So that was why I ended up changing my colors on my base color into these. And here's where I landed with a base coat on my entire piece. For the next step on this piece, we're going to add some of this drippy texture to these leaves. Now, I wanted the drips to be coming from one direction, and gravity wasn't working in my favor, so I flipped this piece on its head so that my drips would be going this way. And so the colors that I'm going to be using are going to be Wisal Tourmaline, Spanish Olive, Dijon, dried thyme, and then I've got a FIFO bottle that has Charleston green in it. And then I've got a small bottle that's got a 50-50 mixture of white vinegar and water. And I'm going to be using an artist brush, and I'm taking some of my Spanish olive, and I'm going to very deliberately place it at certain spots on my leaves. And then I'm going to hit it with that vinegar. And that's just going to soften and it's going to cause the paint to separate just a little bit. Now this is my second coat. I went through and I did one coat, but I want some places for this Spanish olive to be very, very saturated. And so I'm coming through and giving it a second coat just in some spots. I don't want any actual drips, so any spot where my paint has formed, I'm going to mess those up a little bit and just sort of smear out the drip marks. Adding that Spanish olive and the tourmaline around the edges of my leaves, I did get some of it onto the face of my leaf, but I want to keep these a little more true to color. So I'm coming back with a little bit of my Charleston green and a natural bristle brush, and I'm just going to dry brush the very bottoms of the leaf bunches in the dark green. I also want to point out here that you can see spots where I've gone around and I cut my leaves to fit my hardware in the centers of them. I used my hardware, I held it up to the piece, and I used an oscillating saw just to cut around the edges, so there's spots there for my hardware to fit right into. So that's the holes that I'm working around, and those will make sense when I put the hardware on. In hindsight on this one, I wish that I would have left my hardware on and formed my molds around that and then removed the hardware to paint it. I think that actually would have been probably a cleaner look, but hindsight is 20/20. You guys get to learn from my mistakes. Now that I've got the bottoms of my leaves nice and dark from the Charleston green, I'm going to come back and lighten the tips up. This is my tourmaline, and I'm going to do the same process. I'm just going to dry brush a little bit of that tourmaline onto the very tips of the leaf edges. This is going to get those nice and light, and it's going to give me that variegated look and some contrast against the background. So because I did all my drippiness and all this dry brushing upside down, I need to flip my piece. So I enlisted some help, and we're going to flip this back over to where it's right side up so I can do my finishing touches. This was a good lesson. If the perspective on your piece is a little bit wrong, there's no reason you can't flip it to another direction, and this one was small enough that it worked really well. For my final step on these leaves, I'm just hitting the top of the leaves with a little bit of Memory Hardware Artisan powders in French Amber, which is this rich yellow color. And it is a powder. I'm using an artist brush. I'm applying this onto my raw paint. It's unsealed. And I'm just going to hit the top of these leaves just so it looks a little bit like the sun. And then I'm just going to pull it upwards just a tiny bit. And I'm only hitting the very outer edge of the leaves, not all of them. And just the ones that are sort of facing upwards. It wouldn't be one of my pieces if I didn't shade with a little bit of black wax. I just want to kind of emphasize these details on the sides. I'm just taking a fine natural bristle artist brush. I'm running a little bit of black wax into the crevices, and then I'm going to take a light, slightly larger brush and smear that out. This just adds a little bit of shading, kind of emphasizes some of the shape that's to this piece. It's got a lot of curves and I want to bring those out. That black wax just brings out some of the detail. This is one of my favorite things to do. I actually really like shading with waxes. It's something I do on nearly all my pieces, and I really like a little bit firmer wax for my shading process. I also wanted to add a little bit of color to these drawer sides so that when you pull these drawers open, they tie into the body of the piece, and it's just a fun little surprise on the inside. So I'm going to go ahead and add 2 coats of Wise paint and tourmaline. I painted just the drawer sides. The insides of these boxes are going to get oiled with a little bit of Wise furniture salve, which is a hemp oil based salve that has a beautiful smell. My first choice is usually lemon verbena. So I'm going to oil this wood up, and these wood drawer boxes are going to be beautiful. Back at the beginning, I did take this top down to bare wood, and now I'm going to give it a wood treatment. So I'm going to apply a little bit of water-based gel stain. I'm using a mix of black and a medium brown. I'm going to brush them on in a sort of random pattern. I'm using water to keep this wet and to help the wood to absorb it. I want to keep it wet while I'm applying it because I do plan to come back and wipe this back once it's all applied. Once I've got a fairly even coat over the entirety of the top, I make sure and hit the edges, and then I'm going to come back with a rag and I'm going to give this a white back. I did end up doing 2 coats of this to get the color that I wanted. Gel stains will darken up with each coat. With my top all done, we need to pay attention to these hardware. These have been cleaned in my white vinegar and water mixture, but I didn't scrub them with a wire brush or steel wool or anything because I want to leave this dark patina color that they have. I'm just going to add a little bit of Redesign with Prima decor wax. This color is called Eternal, which is a nice antique gold. It is staging day, and I chose to keep the staging on this one, again, fairly simple. I did a little bit of macrame because it ties in with the texture that I've got on here, very natural, bohemian. I've got my gold base that matches my hardware and some tropical leaves that I put in there that tie in with the different colors of green on my piece. So that is my staging. I'm going to take my final photos, and this one is done. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was a really fun one for me to work on. I just got to be creative and I'm thrilled with how it turned out. It's absolutely gorgeous in person. If you guys enjoyed this video, you can find links for everything I use in the description for this post. As always, you can find more Brush by Brandy on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, and my website at brushbybrandy.com.